The one thing that I think a lot of them are also concerned about is, and I've even heard this from guys who would consider themselves anti-war, and somebody that you brought up a lot is John Mearsheimer, but where they say we want to contain China and that the battles for quantum computing. So I did a friend of mine's podcast, I want to say it was Sunday night, and he went over to Namibia for like a week or two. And he said, every single time I go over to China, he's like, I don't get hawkish, but he's like, I get a little bit more skeptical because he's like, I see that that China's going around and building all these relations. They build all this infrastructure in Africa. And he basically laid out the idea that the concern is that they're going to basically monopolize trade routes all over the world. And my pushback to him was like, China doesn't seem to want to have like a hostile worldwide order. The US does. China doesn't, though, because, China, like you were just saying, China imports, I think it's $9 billion in food from the US every single year because there's a lot of desert land in China. So they need to import food. And that's also, an incentive for them to end the Ukraine war, which, Z was talking about a couple of years ago, because there's a lot of grain in Ukraine. So, I mean, really, for China, they need a lot of stuff from throughout the world as well. But once again, if they don't have the US and other places trading partners, they'll just sell the stuff to other people. They don't need us as trading partners, but they want and, in some cases need what we have. But, we need them a lot more than they need us.
And what is China building? China is building ports. During the APEC meeting in Peru, China announced its completion of $3.5 billion mega ports in Chiang Kai port, which, okay, when you build a port on an ocean, it's not just Chinese ship that's going to go to the port. Anybody's ship can go to the port. The port by its definition is open to all. The effect is creating global interconnectivity. I mean, China very much would like to trade with US, with Europe, without trade restrictions. It's US that's putting up trade barriers. This is another thing when US talk about we have to do freedom of navigation in South China Sea to maintain an open, free Indo-Pacific because there's vital sea lanes for the world commerce. Well, what they don't tell you is like 80 to 90% of the shipping traffic through South China Sea is either to or from China. So what kind of interest China has to close down their own vital sea lane? I mean, it's just an excuse. It's more like the U.S. is showing its flag, saying, you know what? Hey, look, we're dancing around in your vital supply route. We could do mischief if you're, if you get on our bad side. I mean, that's U.S. Navy has publicly said, they're going to use Strait of Malacca as a choking point to choke off Chinese energy supply coming from Middle East to South China Sea and all that. So this is no secret. And right now, U.S. always say that. John Mearsheimer's argument is that China is not a status quo power; it's a rising power. So it will challenge the status quo power that is United States. But if you look at what's actually happening, United States is not a status quo power anymore. The U.S. is actively destroying all the international forum and institutions that United States itself helped to build after World War II. I'm talking about UN. They're just throwing UN resolution out of the door like toilet paper. And international the tribunal. Like when they're like, oh, they said something about Israel committing genocide. No, they're not serious. We don't need to abide by that. But what happened is this allow a space for countries like China, Russia, and the risk of BRICS to create alternative international institution. I mean, BRICS originally was an acronym coined by Goldman Sachs as a marketing term for selling stocks in emerging market, but now it's becoming a reality because particularly global South countries see a real need for a real international forum, international institution that offer alternative to the U.S. dominated one that U.S. itself is actively destroying. So China, this is saying China's business is trade, U.S. business is war. I mean, this is unfortunate. But
Yeah.
this is the current state of things. China wants to trade with everyone because China benefits from that trade. China has no incentive to cut off that trade. It's the U.S. that's trying to build walls everywhere, trying to put sanctions.
Right.
U.S. is leveraging its own dollar hegemony to levy financial sanction everywhere, and that's creating the incentive for de-dollarization. Oh, by the way,
Yeah.
and China is not even pushing for de-dollarization. Recently, China just offered a $2 billion sovereign bonds in Saudi Arabia priced in US dollars.
Wow.
And so yes, I mean, like, this is not de-dollarization, this is re-dollarization.
Mhm.
And the reason China is doing that is because one of the basis for the petrodollar, back in the 70s when Kissinger traveled to Saudi Arabia, hammer out the deal where all oil need to be priced in dollars. So that means anybody in the world who needs to pay for energy, they have to pay in dollars. But Saudi Arabia is sitting on this mountain of US dollars they don't know what to do with. So what they do? They buy US Treasury bills,
Mhm.
or they invest in the US real estate, they invest in the US stock market. So all this money eventually gets cycled back into the U.S. economy. And what China and Saudi Arabia, so Saudi Arabia is selling oil for a lot of dollars, and China is exporting everything else for a lot of dollars. So both of them find themselves sitting on piles of dollars. They don't know what to do because China can't use those dollars to buy high-tech items from the United States anymore. So this way, they find okay, so they say, okay, how about we offer sovereign bonds pricing dollar in Saudi Arabia? So that allows Saudi Arabia, all these oil sheiks and the Prince of Saudi Arabia who have tons of money that don't know what to do with, now they have an alternative. Rather than buying US Treasury, now they can buy the Chinese issue dollar bonds. And then the Chinese can take that money, then they can invest in their Belt and Road project all across the global south. And then then those people who are receiving the Chinese dollar investment to building infrastructure, now they have US dollar to pay their US dollar denominated debts, and the dollar gets circled back to United States. So it's win-win-win, right? I mean, but this is how China was able to make the existing financial order of the world work for them. And this is also the reason that US is hell-bending on destroying the current world order, because they see that China is somehow profiting from that, and we can't have that. So this, it kind of gives a light to the idea that China is somehow China is now the status power. It's the United States that's trying to change the status quo by trying to hold China down. So this is what Mearsheimer's argument is really like. U.S. got to do this imperialism better and smarter. Like let's not spread ourselves too thin. Like three-front war in Ukraine, in Middle East, and China. Europe, old Europe, and Middle East. That's passe. That's 20th century. The 21st century lays in Asia Pacific, where that's where all the world's major economies are located right now. This is the economic center, lifeblood of the world. So this is why U.S. needs to concentrate in Asia Pacific to contain China. This is the idea of Mearsheimer. But I mean, at what's the point? You are creating a risk of World War III for what? I mean, for what? Every country in East Asia, they're perfectly happy to trade with U.S. and China. They don't want to be forced to choose. The U.S. is telling these countries, like, okay, you have to pick a side. You're either with us or against us.
Where'd we hear that one?
but people in Southeast Asia, where I am right now, they want to do business with both. Like, they're like, why not both? Why can't we profit from Chinese investment and sell to United States? And by the way, that's actually what's going on right now. After the U.S. sanction on China that started in the first Trump term, Now Chinese direct export to US is declining. But at the same time, the US import from Southeast Asia and Mexico is skyrocketing.
Increasing.
And if you look at the trade flow, it's all these Chinese factories. They're now offsourcing to Vietnam, to Mexico, and Chinese components are now being shipped to Vietnam and Mexico, are being reassembled, and then sold to United States. And US consumer just pay for the premium of this roundabout route, of this extra step. And in the end, the decoupling is not happening. And there's really still not decoupling from China, because China still contains a world supply chain. Yeah, so I've been like going on and on, so I'll let you chime in.
No, yeah, you're good. And yeah, so like a lot of people kind of do look at Mearsheimer as kind of like the one of the greats in foreign policy, but though, like I've never quite come to understand why people say, "Oh, well, we need to contain China. We need to stop China from growing. We can't have China be the leader in AI." And like I understand their perspective from the respect that they want the US to be the global hegemon, and because like the idea generally on people of, I would say, kind of roundabouts my persuasion, more of like a right-wing libertarian stance, is that, hey, we want the US to be the global hegemon because the US is preferable to China. But at the same time, you got to be objective about it and look at these things throughout the last 30 years. The US is not the good, the good, gracious actor all on the world stage. I mean, let's be honest, China has lifted everybody's standard of living up. And if we want to reject that, I'm sorry, the US is going to reject it at our own peril. So when we put all these tariffs, I mean, in Trump's first administration, 94% of his tariffs, the cost fell on consumers. 6% of those costs fell on China. And then, I'm sure I haven't looked up the numbers for the Biden administration, but I mean, he kept all those, all the sanctions and the tariffs on, and then even increased some of them. And Trump hasn't acted like he's going to take any of them off. So how are we going to rein in inflation from here?
And I want to like, for your audience, I wanted to
Yeah,
point out, China is not paying for the tariffs. It's American that's paying for the tariffs.
Yeah.
Like China, when their product leaves their factory, they already got paid for. It's American importers of the Chinese goods, when they bring it through United States, through the American custom, they pay tariff to the U.S. customs. So
Right.
then the American importers just pass that cost to the consumers. So it's the Americans that's directly paying for the tariff. The Chinese, they just make their product for one price, and whoever buys them, can take them and then do whatever you want. And of course, the goal of tariff. I mean, I'm not against tariff. The goal of tariff is to discourage American importers to import from China, so to encourage domestic manufacturing. But that's not happening. That's not happening. And this is because the U.S. have deindustrialized for so long. I mean, the U.S. have been offsourcing factories out of U.S. since 1970s, before China even opened up. It originally was to East Asian countries like Taiwan, South Korea, Southeast Asia, etc. And now there's a 40 years gap when you have like couple generations of Americans who have zero knowledge in manufacturing skills. Like this is a real problem. This is the knowledge gap. Even if they want to bring those factories to United States, you don't have people to staff them anymore, because the ones that originally had the manufacturing skill, they have retired a long time ago, and you don't have a new generations who are trained to do this. So if you have if you want to do this, it's going to be it's a generational effort to reindustrialize United States. But the current U.S. government, they're doing it a half-ass way. China can have industrial policy because China is a communist government. they can have an industrial policy. U.S., we have election every 4 years. You're not going to have a long-term industrial policy that's going to be carried out consistently across multiple decades. That's necessary to reindustrialize America, because that will involve like job training. They will involve overhauling educational system, overhauling infrastructure, over revising tax code, and China did all that, by the way, in the last 40 years to grow. But United States, I mean, the idea is good. The idea is good, but it comes down to execution. I just don't have a lot of trust in the U.S. federal government to be able to execute this plan, this grand plan of reindustrialization of America. It's more likely they're just going to do what their Wall Street sponsors tell them to do. They're going to chase for the short-term profit, because that everything is now being benchmarked against quarterly earning reports and the stock price. They're not going to think like, okay, well, how are we going to do a 5-year plan, 10-year plan of industrializing America? And even a lot of the effect, if you only put tariffs on China, it's even if those factories are not moving out of China, those jobs and factories are just going to move elsewhere, to Vietnam, to Indonesia, to Cambodia, to Bangladesh. They're still not coming back to United States. So do you want to put a comprehensive tariffs on the rest of the world? You will drastically change American life as it is right now. I mean, like, is our elite or anybody in the U.S. is ready to take that step to drastically reforming society? I mean, that's the kind of job that Chinese government can do. I'm not convinced that U.S. government can do any of that things.
Yeah, no, and I'm really not convinced either. So